my first entrance into dreams and dreaming was to understand where dreams come from. And they come from the human brain. So we're sitting here and say, of course they come from the human brain. But that wasn't something we understood till about 50, 70 years ago. For thousands of years, it was thought, we fall asleep, the brain is inactive. The brain is asleep too, not just the body. So how could you have those wild, imaginative experiences? They must come from something external. Gods, the heavens. That was something that was thought to be still relevant till just recently. So if Aristotle is describing dreams 2,000 years ago, it's only in the last 70 years we have proof that dreams come from the brain. What is that proof? This is actually a patient who's alive, and there's an operation called awake brain surgery. The scalp is numbed up, it's flat back, the skull is open like ice fishing, and then the brain is exposed, and the patient is slowly woken up. Because the surface of the brain doesn't feel anything, you can actually tickle the surface with little probes of electrical currents. This is an operation that's done routinely across medical centers, elite medical centers in the world. This isn't something only I do. It was originally described 60 years ago in Canada by Dr. Penfield, and he has all these exquisite reports of stimulating the brain and having patients say, I remember this place, I remember this dream, I remember this nightmare. And when I was in training about 20-something years ago, I remember, while thinking about the craft and the movements, that when the professor and I stimulated the surface of the brain, the patient said, this is a nightmare that I've had my whole life since I was a kid. And that struck with me. I was like, wow, how could that be? But then I moved on to the craft. And I learned more. I started a laboratory, a group, my lab grows neurons in a petri dish. I took care of patients. But that one experience has stayed with me for decades. And that's the opening of the book. The first question is the one I can answer most firmly. Dreams come from our brains. And awake brain surgery is the proof of that. Then the next big topic. What happens when we sleep? I'm going to say something bold. I think we sleep because we must dream, and I'll take you through where I come to that. The electrodes that are placed on the scalp, the first time it was done was by somebody named Dr. Berger, maybe about 110 years ago. And it was the first time electricity could be detected, not just delivered. It wasn't trying to shock anything, it was trying to just measure the electricity within that species, within that system. And what they recorded was something fascinating. So, electrical readout. Just like if you put 3 stickers on the chest, you get an EKG. Everybody's familiar with that. We've seen it on all the medical shows. When you put 96, you get something like this. But what people didn't recognize was when they did that, they put the stickers on, they walked away, the stickers were still on, and when the patient was asleep, nobody noticed it then until about 60, 70 years ago. The sleeping brain and the waking brain had the same electrical patterns. The brain was not resting while we sleep. The brain does not hibernate. The brain does not cool off. The patterns in certain stages of sleep are so active electrically, metabolically, that they're similar to the patterns we have during waking thought. The waking brain and the dreaming brain can look so much similar electrically. Of course, we're asleep, we're not moving. It looks like the brain should be asleep too, but the brain is on fire. So much so that it's called paradoxical sleep, that looking at the patterns of activity in the sleeping/dreaming brain can be quite similar to the waking brain. And that's a massive point to take home. There is nothing peaceful going on with the dreaming brain. It is a robust activity, electrically, metabolically, with blood flow. If there is a difference, as we opened, the waking brain and the dreaming brain, I had showed you that frontal lobe that was tamped down. So for them to be the same electrically, something in the dreaming brain has to be tamped up comparatively. And that's the emotional, imaginative centers of the brain. The dreaming brain is hyper-emotional, and the waking brain is hyper-executive, task-oriented. These are the two features of the waking brain and dreaming brain that we have to keep in mind. They are the same brain. They produce the same electricity. There's blood flow going all the time. There's no activation and deactivation, really. There's just a modulation of shifts. The waking brain is executive network, pointing outward, relying on the prefrontal cortex more. The dreaming brain is less prefrontal cortex, and to compensate, a lot more emotion. So much emotion can happen in the dreaming brain that even if you tried to be as wild as you could with your waking brain, you couldn't match it. The top speed of emotion and visual dynamics in the dreaming brain exceed what is possible during the waking brain. And that science guides me in chapter 9 towards the end of this talk to get into how do you interpret dreams. We'll keep in mind the brain state that is generating those dreams is hyper-emotional and hyper-visual. So when I saw this, that the electricity is similar, then the natural questions were, okay, the brain is active while we sleep. The brain is doing something fundamental because we take the risks of sleep. It's costly. And then what could that be? And that enters into the journey here of the nature of dreams. Why do we have erotic dreams, nightmares, falling from a cliff, chased by a monster at age 6? When my sons had never seen a monster, and I had to explain to them, it was only a dream. Like, what are these features? How do we start to understand now that you've got a little bit of dreaming brain science and waking brain science? How do we think about fundamental things like erotic dreams? So there's 6 or 7 of these that I'll go into, and I'll start with this one. Do erotic dreams rely on self-touch? So the answer is no. That maybe this depiction by Picasso is off. That what happens in the dreaming brain during an erotic dream, it needs no sensory input. The erotic zones of the brain, the sensations, are just created by the imagination. People who are paralyzed can have erotic dreams. People after menopause have erotic dreams. Some of my patients who've had chemical castration for prostate cancer have erotic dreams. And so there is a feature, the imagination of the mind. When you run in your dreams, the neurons are activated just as if you were running the London Marathon. When you have erotic emotions in your dreams, they're created by the brain, for the brain. The sensations don't have to come from your body or an external arrangement. So there is no self-touch required in erotic dreams, and it makes me look at art and other things that maybe some of our understandings were incomplete. Erotic dreams are fascinating in several ways. Let's look at the patterns of erotic dreams. Essentially universal, across different cultures, and most importantly, what struck me was erotic dreams arrive before the erotic act. So let's think about that. The mind conjures sensuality before we have the ability to feel sensuality. How does it go that we can detect just touch can potentially become a caress, but the nerves in our extremities haven't changed? The brain changes. The brain becomes capable of feeling sensuality, of having erotic emotions and thoughts. That change happens after erotic dreams arrive. When you look at the pattern of people when they report erotic dreams arriving, it's before the act. And when it almost sets off a pattern of development in the brain, something called the genital cortex, where sensation can now become from just touch to caress or sensuality. The timing of erotic dreams arriving before the erotic act is something that defies neurodevelopmental biology. Usually it's use it or lose it. If you have a child and you don't let them walk, the sensation and motor regions of the brain that are responsible for moving the legs, they'll wither. Usually we're born with the capacity and we have to keep it cultivated to hold on to it. I've had some patients where I had to cover up one of the eyes. The occipital lobe withers. So we're born with it, it's use it or lose it, except in one scenario in developmental biology. Erotic dreams arrive before the erotic act. So that's the fascinating finding of patterns and science between erotic dreams. And the other interesting finding is infidelity is commonly reported. 85% of people report infidelity in erotic dreams. And does that mean that we are always tempted? I don't think so. I think it's relationship dependent. If you're in a good relationship and you have infidelity in your dreams, that's just an embodiment of desire, is my understanding of it. If you're in a bad relationship, it might mean something else. Most importantly, erotic dreams also have this interesting pattern where the characters tend to be narrow. When you ask enough dream reports, they tend to be people they know, a small group of people, people in a tribe, if you will, repellent bosses. Kids have sometimes erotic dreams about family members. The people that are the target of desire in erotic dreams tends to be narrow, but the description of the acts and the locations tends to be wilder. And so I don't have an explanation for that, but if I had to venture a guess, we would tap into this field called evolutionary psychology or cognitive archaeology. Like, why do we think certain ways? And is our thoughts an adaptation that we've inherited from our ancestors, much like our physical traits are? And so the thought there is that if there's a population bottleneck, the species would benefit from having robust desire, but also keeping it within the tribe and not in neighboring species or hominids and such when during developmental times. So that's all theoretical. The patterns of dreaming are well established. Everybody has them. Infidelity is common. And the science is fascinating that you don't need to touch to have the erotic experience. The brain can create it on its own. That's my take on erotic dreams, and it's something I open with because it's something that takes imagination to understand. Can waking up be filled with terror? Dreaming brain, waking brain. During those transitions of going from dreaming brain to waking brain, it's not a thin line where all of a sudden you're awake and now all of a sudden you're dreaming. There's a window for 10, 15 minutes called sleep entry. Okay, so then you're in sleep, you're in your dreaming brain mode. Then when you wake up, there's a little window called sleep exit. It's not a crisp exit from dreaming to waking or waking to dreaming. When you wake up and your body is locked down and your mind comes to before the body is liberated, during dreaming the body is temporarily paralyzed so you don't act out your dreams, you can have something called sleep paralysis. Has anybody had sleep paralysis? That's surprisingly common. So this book was an education for me too. I have not had this. This is a painting that describes some of the central features. Clearly a lot of people have had it, up to 1/3. Different cultures have come up with stories to explain it, incubus and succubus, all across different cultures. So how do we tackle, from a scientific point of view, what this artist describes here? So the original nightmare was sleep paralysis. Nightmares, by definition, are terrifying dreams that wake you up and sear something into your memory. Sleep paralysis is a goofy name that we gave that's confusing, but what I call it is, it's a discoordinated or mismatch in sleep exit. Your mind has come to, but your body's locked down. And that can be a terrifying experience, filled with panic, filled with terror. So how do we get these features? Why do people report suffocation? Let's leave the goblin or the monster out of it, but suffocation, feeling tight-chested, is a common feature, and people have described it as something was sitting on my chest. People who have heart attacks say, oh, an elephant was sitting on my chest. So there's this feeling of suffocation is something sitting on your chest so you can't fully inhale. So here's where we bring in some anatomical knowledge. To fully breathe deeply, you have your diaphragm that stays active when you're asleep. That's not paralyzed by design. And then you have these accessory muscles in your neck. You can see them in children when you're really trying to breathe. Those are unavailable when you're asleep and dreaming. So my hunch and my explanation for why the feeling of suffocation is, you're feeling panic of being locked in. Your brain is having psychedelic experiences about goblins. You're trying to breathe as deep as you can, but you're being restricted because your accessory muscles are paralyzed and not accessible. And so you have this feeling of you're suffocating. And the stories are created that somebody is sitting on your chest. Number two, what is the feature of goblins and something sitting on your chest? During the time when you enter sleep, serotonin, the one that's connected to Prozac and antidepressants, but it does so many other things. It's related to psychedelics as well. Serotonin is downregulated, it's tampered while you sleep, so is adrenaline. And then when you come to, those neurotransmitters have to start circulating in the brain again. If you wake up and the serotonin is flooding open, but your body is locked down, that might explain the psychedelic experience of a goblin or a succubus or an incubus on your chest. And then the lurking intruder, the horse in the corner, this often described as a lurking intruder. Brain surgery offers us an insight to that sometimes we wake up the patient again and we tickle the surface of the brain over here, the temporoparietal junction, and people and patients have reported, I feel like there's something, a body image right behind me, behind my shoulders. So people have these experiences through electrical phenomena in brain surgery. I think that explains the lurking intruder. The suffocation is not having the respiratory muscles available. And then I think the ghosts and goblins and all the psychedelic experiences is from a serotonin mismatch. That has been my offering to the concepts behind sleep paralysis that people have felt for so long, and now maybe we have some inkling of why that happens, okay?